Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to participate in CopyCamp. It's great to be here. I'm a strange public servant, and I'm also a copyright lawyer. So I head a specialist team called the National Copyright Unit, and we are in government reporting to the state and territory departments of education of Australia in relation to copyright issues. Part of our job is negotiating with collecting societies because Australia has a unique education statutory license system. We also provide education to teachers and in schools and to the vocational education sector. We provide advice to teachers who ring up or email about what they can do under copyright. And a big part of what we do also is make representations on part of the school sector and the vet sector on what changes need to be made to copyright law. And so, and we seem to be doing a lot of that over the last 5 years. So let me see if this works. So what we're looking at now is education no longer is the chalk and talk world. This world is now over. Now what we're seeing is this, which is basically things like virtual reality learning, flipped classrooms, self-directed learning on student devices. We also are looking at things like 3D printers, student-centric learning, where basically the teacher is able to use technology to make on-the-spot assessment of a student's work, get involved immediately, give immediate feedback, and this often works with things like interactive whiteboards, document cameras, and other new technology. We also have the emergence, particularly in Australia, of bring your own device. So lots of schools and students are now using, the students bringing their own tablets, their own smartphones, their own laptops into the classroom. So it's, again, it's become that. And also we're seeing an emergence of augmented and virtual reality learning in schools as well. We're also seeing things like everything's online, everything's collaborative. As I said before, the chalk and talk days gone. So now we're looking at Google Classroom, where teachers and students are collaborating in a Google Classroom to give feedback, peer review, access content. Edmodo, YouTube is now hugely used by teachers across the world as a video is becoming a dominant learning tool being used by teachers around the world. Mathletics is all around the world. It's an online subscription where parents and schools and students actually pay a certain amount of money a year to subscribe to Mathletics. It's very game-based, interactive learning, and again, a lot of kids are learning maths thinking they're actually playing a game, and this is incredibly popular around the world. But our laws are really, really outdated. So copyright laws, particularly the ones in Australia, and I suspect this is the same the world over in Europe, and also in other places where our laws were invented or updated in the age of the photocopier and the video recorder. And they're not working in the age of the iPad or the 3D printer or data and text mining. So we've got inconsistent kind of rules for educational use around the world, which is strange because we all are signed up to GATT and TRIPS, so there's minimum protection of copyright, but there doesn't seem to be any minimum standards for educational use or other non-harmful public interests. And you can see here that this is a very interesting work that's been done by Communia, particularly Teresa Nobre. I really recommend that you go to the Communia website and see some of their policy work and their research. But that just screenshot shows us basically how inconsistent, even in the EU, how educational use exceptions are actually treated. And so most of the time they're pretty outdated, they're pretty confusing, they're very restrictive, and most teachers don't know what they can do, what are they permitted to do under copyright law. The other thing we need to be aware about is the race to STEM. So science, technology, engineering and maths, 75 of the fastest growing occupations require this skill set. And there's a huge push in every government around the world to actually provide specialist STEM education. And this has been incorporated in school curriculums, not just in Australia, but in the US and in Europe. And so the other thing that we're trying to do is we're trying to focus kids on having real-life scenarios and project-based learning, and which combine them being able to do things like skill-based challenges, innovative hands-on practical work, motivational game-like activities, the maker space. All this stuff is now happening in the classroom. But for us, you see, we've got really bizarre laws in Australia. So we've got one law that says it's okay for us to write on a blackboard. That's not infringing copyright. But as soon as I write on an interactive whiteboard, I have to get permission and pay a license fee. It used to be the time in many countries you're able to, you know, when I was a kid in the classroom, it was exciting when the teacher wheeled in the video recorder and we were going to watch something on the video recorder in the classroom. Now, most countries have an exception that allows you to play the video recorder or the DV recorder. But if you do it through an interactive whiteboard, you're actually not covered by that particular types of exception. There's lots of other examples. Lots of countries don't have distance-based learning. So, new technology is very, very important, helps us improve our critical creative thinking, problem solving, communication skills, the using of new equipment, techniques, concepts. Also helps us skill up for the 21st century, and basically our population's becoming more skill-based and more competitive. There's great new learning analytics and assessment analytics to help teachers immediately evaluate students as they're learning and able to give them feedback to improve their learning. And also teachers are also constantly trying to create new resources for their students. They're not just taking the textbook or the YouTube video, they're often making their own learning resources to actually use with their students, and also often doing that with the students themselves. And increasingly we're also finding that schools are actually being encouraged to work with industry or to work with outside specialists. Because industry now is demanding that the school-based system is providing kids with the skills that they need immediately when they leave school. So we're seeing examples of kids actually working in that way. For instance, in Australia, we had Maryville High School developed a moisturiser, which is actually now being tested in space by NASA. We have another 1,000 students in Australia across 40 schools who are doing many, many types of experiments that they're actually on radiation. So they are using experiments that is being tested now by NASA in space on the exposure to radiation. And really incredible things. So at the moment we've got a few countries that have what we call flexible exceptions meaning that they don't have to keep on changing every few years to come up with technology. And of course we all know about the United States fair use. That's been around in a codified state since 1976. And it has survived since 1976. It's been able to adapt to the emergence of new technologies, whether it's been the video recorder, the photocopier, whether it's now sort of data and text mining, whether it's the MOOCs, the massive open online courses. The fair use exception in the States doesn't need to be updated every 5 or 10 years. Other countries like Israel have recently updated their copyright laws to have a fair dealing exception that uses the same kind of factors and principled approach as the United States. Canada has a fair dealing for education, which was recently passed about 2012. That has also introduced things like user right generated content exceptions, as well as using freely available internet material in education, as well as fair dealing for education. So they've actually got a very well established sort of case law which supports user rights. Korea and Singapore, again, they have also both updated their laws to have a more open and flexible exception, which again is going to stand the test of time and not need to be updated every 5 or 10 years when a new technology comes into place. And then we've got a number of countries that are struggling with looking at their copyright laws at the moment and how they should change them to make them workable, fair, and able to deal with innovation and technology as it emerges. So Australia has made some recommendations through the Australian Law Reform Commission and Productivity Commission. South Africa at the moment is debating changes to its copyright laws, and that's looking at a open, flexible, fair use style exception in South Africa. So that's currently under debate and discussion. Singapore, even though it's got a fair dealing exception for education, it's currently reviewing its laws at the moment to see if that needs to have any changes, if it's worked. Also, you've got the European Union looking at particular directives, which seems to be a nightmare at the moment. And you also have New Zealand that's about to start looking at its copyright law and looking at what changes that needs to make to the legislation. So there are a lot of different models available in many countries. But you need to look at whether the models in other countries actually work in your own country. So if you're looking at what laws need to be changed, it's very important to engage with your local experts, because what may work in the US may not work in Australia. Definitely won't work in the EU because of the EU directive at the moment doesn't allow you necessarily to introduce a fair use style exception. So you just really need to make sure, is the model right for your country? What has the case law been thus far that ensures that you're not sort of adopting something which looks really great on paper that may work in another country but may not work in your own because of how your law has been developed. So in Australia, I'm going to share a little bit about what we are facing in Australia, which is a little bit, and I think the same things I'm going to be talking about probably will apply to a lot of other countries as well. So our problem is that our copyright law basically penalises teachers using new technologies in the classroom. And it's because there's a mix of compulsory licenses, so Australia's unique. We have statutory licenses set out in mind-numbingly detailed in the Copyright Act, currently around 35 pages, which allow educational institutions to copy text and images and to copy TV, radio broadcasts for educational purposes. And we have some free use exceptions that sit alongside some of these statutory licenses. We also have no TPM exceptions that allow us to use our free use educational uses, and that can be a bit of a problem. And we have different rules depending on what type of material you're using. So there's different rules if you're using text and images, and there are different rules if you're using film or sound recording. There's a different rule if you're using exams. There's a different rule if you are displaying particular types of material in the classroom, so that can be a bit problematic. So for instance, I can communicate or display an artistic work on an interactive whiteboard, or I can play a film on an interactive whiteboard or sound recording, and that is free. But if I display text, I have to pay a license fee. So it's completely inconsistent. And the other problem we have is when we updated our copyright laws back in 1999, the internet wasn't so pervasive as it is now. So under our statutory license schemes, in particular the educational use of text and images, that actually applies to freely available internet material. So we're the only country in the world that pays license fees for students using freely available internet material. And here's some examples of what we're talking about. Displaying a Spanish translation using a translation app. That is actually something we pay for under a license. Taking a screenshot from a website which shows different time in different countries is something we pay for. Telling students to print out an information sheet from a Royal Commission website. Telling students to print out a page from the RSPCA on how to care for animals from a website. Displaying an image of a cat on a screen is something that is now we're paying license fees for. Printing a fact sheet on head lice. Well, head lice is a big problem in schools generally, but Department of Health gives us information sheets, but if we print it out and give it to students, that actually attracts a license fee. And I love this one. This is like a teacher using from a catalogue, a shopping catalogue, a tiny photo of a yellow raincoat in a PowerPoint. That attracts a license fee. So many things that we do, like playing a movie, using new technology, now used to be fine in the classroom, but now we have to actually get permission. And also our laws are not even up to date to deal with things like educational apps or games. We pay for the use of orphan works under the statutory licences. So this here is a little infographic which we kind of use as our advocacy and to explain to politicians, government, parents why we actually need copyright law reform. Because we can write a quote from a book on a blackboard, but if we do an interactive whiteboard, we pay for it. If we show an artwork on a screen, that's fine. If we show text, it's not fine. We are paying for things like, reproducing a Twitter feed is something that comes under a licence fee that you pay for in Australia. So we want to make sure we are very supportive of a fair use regime that enables us to make these sort of uses which do not harm the creators market or the copyright owners market. So we can't do things like MOOCs. The same thing I think happens in Europe as well and many other countries. There's nothing there that allows us to do any data and text mining. We couldn't use 5 seconds in a film clip of a school performance. That's something we can't do because we haven't got fair use. A teacher was not able to submit student projects into a competition because we haven't got an exception that allows us to do the no fair use types exceptions. There's been other examples that we have dealt with, like a school wanted to send parents thumbnail images of books with a little excerpt of the book to inform them on what their children were reading in class, but none of the existing educational exceptions allow us to do that. We had a teacher who made this amazing video for maths where he used 1 minute of the music from Gangnam Style, and he did this huge classroom activity using that music to teach the kids maths. The teacher was nominated for a National Teaching Award and won, but they couldn't show it at the awards, and they couldn't. And the newspapers and the broadcast news wanted to report on this, but they actually could not do it because there wasn't an exception that allowed us to do that. So we pay millions of dollars to use freely available internet material and orphan works. And here's some other examples of stuff that we pay for. These sort of activities I'm talking about here, copying a page from a blog that says 180 free speech therapy workshops for teachers and students. We pay for it. Another one there, copying an image from a Facebook page. That's something else that attracts a payment. But these types of issues or uses would be something that would be likely to fall under fair use. Time out, okay. I really took 20 minutes, didn't I? So I suppose the time out, 2 seconds, 2 minutes maybe. Australia has had 2 Productivity Commission and an Australian Law Reform Commission review. It's had 7 independent reviews that have recommended the introduction of fair use in Australia. 7 independent reviews. At the moment, the government is, even though it's had 7 independent reviews making the recommendation, is going to take do another consultation with the key stakeholders to consider whether or not they're going to introduce a fair use or a fair use style exception. The important thing here is the issues I've just brought up here are the same issues that are around the world. And basically, we're at a situation now where many countries are looking at this, and it's really imperative that the education has a voice in the debate. Traditionally, what happens is education doesn't actually have an advocacy voice in this debate, partly because education is government. It's departments of education. And departments of education don't generally lobby or advocate other departments or governments for making changes to laws in relation to schools or TAFEs or universities. So unlike the usual debate where you have civil society groups participating, education has always been a silent voice because it's not an area that conventionally you are able to participate in. So I think it's really important the work the community is doing, that we're doing to show you really need to think about education, particularly schools, because everyone's kids go to school. And we need to be developing a workforce and students who have got the right skills for the 21st century. So it's important that we try and support change.